The sky over Washington burns red with morning light. Or is it cannon fire? Flags whip in the wind as the thunder of a 21-gun salute rolls across the National Mall. Tanks glisten beneath the Capitol dome. Cameras flash. The crowd sings "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." But behind the patriotic roar, something else begins to rise. The sound of millions shouting two defiant words: "No kings." What happens when the symbols of democracy clash with the will of the streets? The scene is divided in two Americas. One celebrates strength, sovereignty, and control under President Donald Trump. The other, scattered from Los Angeles to Philadelphia, cries out against what it sees as creeping authoritarianism. More than 2,500 rallies, the largest wave of protest since the Vietnam era, unfold across all 50 states. Each side claims to defend freedom, yet neither trusts the other's definition of it. Months earlier, Trump's second term began with a storm of executive orders, immigration limits, federal overhauls, tightened security protocols. Birthright citizenship was reinterpreted. ICE raids multiplied under new quotas. When riots broke out in Los Angeles, Trump federalized the California National Guard, overriding Governor Gavin Newsom. Legal scholars called it unprecedented. The president called it law and order. As tanks rolled and soldiers deployed in U.S. cities, comparisons to foreign conflicts surfaced. In Ukraine, where martial law shadows daily life, the government justifies domestic control in the name of security. In Israel and Iran, state authority routinely overrides protest under the flag of national survival. And in China, the memory of Tiananmen is a silent ghost haunting every demonstration. America, once the global symbol of liberty, now echoes the same balance of fear and control. The protests that followed became inevitable. For every citizen demanding stability, another saw dictatorship rising. Families divided, city blocks barricaded. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott labeled the movement Antifa-linked. In Massachusetts, Mayor Michelle Wu promised her city would march for democracy itself. Strategically, the crisis exposes the heart of Trump's domestic doctrine, what defense news analysts describe as command centralization in the name of sovereignty. The military parade was not only a celebration, it was a statement to allies and adversaries alike. To NATO, it demonstrated resolve. To Beijing and Moscow, it warned that America's divisions would still march under one flag. But to millions at home, it felt like a line being crossed. As the chants echo through the marble corridors of power, the question remains: can a democracy survive when both sides believe they are defending it from tyranny? It began with a pen stroke and ended with soldiers on American streets. In the months following his inauguration, President Donald Trump wielded executive power like a hammer, reshaping immigration, policing, and civil oversight in ways not seen since the aftermath of 9/11. Strong nations have strong borders, he declared, as federal agents raided neighborhoods from Miami to Seattle. But strength, as history warns, often comes at the expense of liberty. By midsummer, the administration had federalized state National Guard units, bypassing governors who resisted federal immigration policies. The most dramatic moment came in California, when Trump overrode Governor Gavin Newsom's objection and placed Guard troops directly under federal command. The decision, defended by the White House as essential to restore order, sent shockwaves through legal circles. The Brennan Center for Justice called it an extraordinary expansion of presidential power. Constitutional scholar Elizabeth Goitein warned that such authority erodes the boundary between civilian governance and military enforcement. From the White House perspective, however, the measures were part of a broader strategy, an assertion of centralized power meant to project confidence abroad. As Defense News noted, the move came just as tensions with China escalated over the South China Sea, and as NATO debated defense spending targets amid the Russia-Ukraine war's grinding stalemate. Trump's message was clear: America would be unified, disciplined, and defiant under his watch. Yet at home, that same display of discipline fueled fury. The first No Kings protests erupted as ICE checkpoints expanded, and journalists were subpoenaed under new national security orders. The protests spread like wildfire, not only in liberal strongholds, but across conservative towns where residents feared unchecked authority. It isn't about left or right, one marcher in Kansas told Reuters. It's about control. Analysts at The Guardian and DW drew comparisons to the early stages of Ukraine's Maidan uprising and Iran's 2022 morality law protests, moments when governments underestimated how quickly public anger could shift from protest to revolt. The US is witnessing its own stress test of democracy, wrote BBC World News. The question is whether its institutions are still strong enough to hold. Inside the Pentagon, uneasy parallels were drawn to Operation Restore Calm, a classified domestic contingency plan modeled on foreign stability missions. While officials denied any intent to militarize governance, Jane's Defense Weekly reported the quiet deployment of communication units to several US cities, an unusual move in peacetime. What followed was an uneasy calm. Streets patrolled by soldiers, civil agencies placed under emergency coordination, and a public beginning to question who truly commanded the nation's security. In that silence, a new anxiety took hold, not about the protests themselves, but about what might come next. Across global capitals, diplomats watched closely. If the world's oldest democracy could deploy its army internally to suppress dissent, what message did that send to nations like China or Russia? Could Washington still lecture others about freedom when it was struggling to contain its own? The protests had forced America to confront its own reflection, one half armored, the other shouting for air. And as the tension deepened, one haunting question lingered. In the pursuit of absolute security, how much freedom can a nation afford to lose before it becomes unrecognizable? The second wave was inevitable. The government shutdown had entered its third week, choking salaries, halting public services, and straining the patience of millions. Food banks overflowed, airports delayed flights, and the air around Washington thickened with frustration. But across the country, something else was forming. A slow, organized heartbeat of resistance. No Kings 2, as it came to be known, was no longer a spontaneous movement. It was a campaign of endurance. In union halls and church basements, volunteers trained in conflict de-escalation. They learned how to keep marches peaceful, how to protect each other when the tear gas came. Reuters described a quiet network of teachers, veterans, and students moving like a disciplined shadow army for democracy. Leah Greenberg, co-founder of Indivisible, told BBC News, "This isn't rebellion, it's memory. America remembers who it is." At the same time, federal agencies worked deep into the night. The Department of Homeland Security circulated intelligence memos warning of potential indicators of violence, urging coordination between city police and National Guard detachments. One chilling line stood out: no specific or credible threats identified. Despite that, armored vehicles appeared on city outskirts, and surveillance drones hovered over major intersections. Political leaders took sides. House Speaker Mike Johnson condemned the protests as economic sabotage, blaming demonstrators for prolonging the shutdown. Senator Roger Marshall warned that violence is inevitable. Meanwhile, mayors from Boston to Seattle pledged solidarity with their citizens. "You can't silence America with soldiers," said Boston's Michelle Wu after the White House threatened to revoke her city's World Cup hosting rights. The media war intensified. Conservative outlets branded Indivisible as a Soros-funded disruption network, citing millions in donations from the Open Society foundations. Greenberg didn't deny it. "Transparency isn't our weakness," she replied in a Guardian interview. "Silencing dissent is." Analysts at DW noted that what unfolded mirrored a larger global pattern: governments testing the limits of power under crisis. In Ukraine, emergency laws had normalized military presence on city streets. In Iran, police checkpoints became permanent fixtures. And in China, a temporary digital surveillance grid built during the pandemic had evolved into a tool of total control. The parallels were stark, and America now stood among them. Inside the US, the political temperature rose. Governors like Greg Abbott fortified state lines, calling protesters radicalized factions. Trump advisors, according to Al Jazeera, saw the demonstrations as a chance to reassert federal supremacy. One insider was quoted saying, "The president believes that restoring discipline at home strengthens his hand abroad." Indeed, global observers interpreted Trump's domestic hardline stance as part of a broader reassertion of American sovereignty, a message directed as much at Beijing and Tehran as at domestic critics. But for ordinary Americans, the narrative was simpler. Power was concentrating and the people were pushing back. A mother in Los Angeles held a cardboard crown split in half. A veteran in Chicago carried a sign that read, "I served a republic, not a ruler." By the eve of the protests, the nation seemed to teeter on the edge of something historic. Neither side would back down, and as the dawn of No Kings 2 approached, the air was filled not with slogans, but with the quiet understanding that the next 24 hours could redefine what it meant to be free. So when the sun rose on that Saturday morning, Americans faced a question no government could answer for them. In a democracy under strain, who truly holds the power? The state or the people? Long before the chants began, the machinery of control was already turning. In the windowless operations center of the Department of Homeland Security, glowing monitors displayed real-time feeds of major U.S. cities. Commanders whispered into headsets. Drones relayed live images from Portland, Austin, and Chicago. And somewhere deep inside the Pentagon, a red file labeled Continuity Readiness, Domestic Deployment was unlocked. America was preparing for itself. Officially, federal agencies insisted the mobilization was precautionary, yet internal documents leaked to Reuters painted a different picture. One of preemptive coordination between military liaisons, state police, and intelligence units weeks before the first protest permit was filed. "We are in uncharted territory," said one anonymous DHS official to The Guardian. "This level of synchronization only happens in wartime." On cable networks, the framing war began. Fox News called the protesters a mob of professional agitators. MSNBC called them citizens reclaiming the Constitution. CNN's headline captured the divide perfectly. "The day America faces its reflection." At the center of it all stood the Trump administration, firm in its conviction that order must prevail. "No chaos, no anarchy, not under my watch," the president declared from the White House balcony. His speech, broadcast live worldwide, was carried by BBC News with a single-line caption: "A nation celebrates and trembles." Strategically, analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly saw parallels between the administration's domestic posture and its foreign strategy. The use of overwhelming readiness, visible, disciplined, and intimidating, mirrored U.S. deterrence models in the South China Sea and Persian Gulf. Just as Washington sought to contain Beijing's naval aggression, it now projected similar force to contain unrest at home. To allies, this looked like strength. To critics, it was democracy wearing a uniform. Inside the intelligence community, there was unease. A joint DW Defense News report revealed that several retired generals had warned of mission drift, the gradual blending of law enforcement and military roles. The U.S. was built on the separation of these functions, one former commander noted. The minute soldiers act as police, the Republic's image begins to crack. Globally, the optics were electric. Moscow's state media mocked the unrest as proof of Western hypocrisy. Beijing's Global Times ran headlines asking, "Is the American dream now guarded by soldiers?" Even allies like Germany and Japan urged Washington to exercise restraint consistent with democratic norms. Yet the message from the administration was unapologetic. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien told Al Jazeera that the protests were a test of resilience, not repression. He compared the situation to Ukraine's defense of Kyiv. Leadership requires firmness, even when misunderstood. But the human cost was visible. In cities like Portland and Phoenix, parents formed volunteer safety circles to escort children to school. In Chicago, shopkeepers boarded windows, fearing riots. And in D.C., veterans of the Iraq War watched armored vehicles pass their own homes. One held a sign that read, "We defended democracy abroad. Who defends it here?" By nightfall, the stage was set. The government fully mobilized, the movement fully awake. Across the globe, news anchors asked the same question. How far could the world's most powerful democracy stretch its definition of freedom before it snapped? The engines of the state were humming. The people were marching. And as history has often shown, when both move at once, something unbreakable is about to give. It began at dawn. From the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to the beaches of Santa Monica, millions moved as one. Teachers, nurses, veterans, clergy, teenagers, all chanting the same words: "No kings." The air trembled with the weight of history. Helicopters hovered above, their rotors slicing through the sound of drums and cheers. Streets glistened with handmade signs. Power belongs to the people. Democracy, not dynasty. In Washington, D.C., the view was cinematic. Tanks gleaming under the morning sun, National Guard lines cutting across Pennsylvania Avenue, and on the horizon, a sea of citizens pressing forward like a living tide. To some, it looked like defiance. To others, like deliverance. Cameras captured the president standing on the White House balcony, flanked by flags and saluting troops, his expression unreadable as the chants echoed through the city. Whose streets? Our streets. Reuters estimated turnout at over 5 million nationwide, a number surpassing even the 1963 March on Washington. BBC World News called it the largest synchronized act of civil resistance in modern American history. Despite fears of chaos, most marches remained peaceful. Minor clashes erupted in Portland and Phoenix, but organizers quickly restored calm. "We don't fight soldiers," a protest leader told Al Jazeera. "We fight silence." Still, tension lingered like a storm cloud. Armored vehicles idled near city edges, drones monitored movement, and communication blackouts hit parts of Chicago and Dallas. The Department of Homeland Security later called it routine interference. Civil rights observers called it digital suppression. Strategically, Jane's Defense Weekly noted the striking symmetry between the president's domestic posture and global deterrence. While American troops abroad faced Iranian naval maneuvers in the Persian Gulf and Chinese encroachments near Guam, a different kind of confrontation unfolded at home. The clash between civilian mass and institutional might. Defense news drew a parallel to Ukraine's endurance against Russian pressure. The weapon is not force, but conviction. For America's allies, the images broadcast worldwide told a story of contrast. A nation that sent troops to defend freedom overseas was now testing its own boundaries of liberty within. European analysts on DW warned that Washington's credibility as leader of the free world was eroding with every Humvee deployed on home soil. If America cannot trust its people to march peacefully, one German commentator said, how can its allies trust its promise of democracy? Yet, amid the confrontation, something remarkable unfolded: empathy. In city squares, police officers knelt beside clergy to pray. Soldiers lowered their helmets as protesters passed. One image, captured by The Guardian, went viral. A little girl on her father's shoulders, holding an American flag with the words, "No Kings," painted across her cheeks. That moment silenced the nation. The chants softened, the tension eased. For a fleeting hour, it felt like the soul of the Republic had paused, not in victory or defeat, but in recognition. But even as the day ended, questions loomed. Could this fragile unity survive once the streets cleared? Would Washington retreat or double down? And perhaps most haunting of all, had the protests defended democracy or simply revealed how close it already stood to the edge? Night descended slowly over a country that no longer felt the same. The chants had faded, the flags folded, yet the echoes of millions still vibrated in the air like the aftershock of an earthquake. Streetlights flickered over empty avenues, once filled with voices. In Washington, the last protesters dispersed beneath the watchful gaze of soldiers. No one claimed victory, but no one surrendered either. Across the nation, the tension hardened into silence, that heavy, uncertain calm that follows history's turning points. The government remained shut down, the National Guard stayed on alert, but beneath the surface, something irreversible had shifted. For the first time in decades, Americans had drawn a visible line between power and obedience. At the White House, President Trump addressed the nation from the Oval Office. His words were firm, rehearsed, and deeply polarizing. America will remain strong, he declared, and under this administration, order will never fall to anarchy. To his supporters, it was reassurance. To his critics, it was confirmation of their fears. BBC News called it a speech for stability. The Guardian called it a warning